Okay, so the documents that we have are the one we'll start with the tints, tones, and shades and complements. We're going to wait on the color wheel if we do that at all. And then this one looks super complicated, but it's not, and it like kind of will help us get through the whole semester having control over our colors. Okay, so we'll start with this one. And this is what we have been doing with the black and white. So this one we should be able to do pretty quickly, where we're going to get out our ivory black and our titanium white. Have we all decided we're probably going to run out of white? I think so. I'd have to get more. So we'll do the titanium, not the zinc. Or transparent, I guess they call it in this brand. I'm going to use my solvent-free fluid to move the paint around a little bit today. Again, like I said, since we're painting on the cardstock, it is not archival because the materials will eat the paper, but I think just for the exercise it's okay. I'm going to add more of this stuff. Hopefully you guys are feeling good about the fluids and the gels and the everything. So on the side of the palette, let's lay out our, I'm going to go with like a hefty chocolate chip of black. And then the same for the white. I'll probably need more. I'll probably need more of the white than I will of the black. And then, as it says on the document, we could do this pretty quickly. We're going to mix the 30, the 50, and the 70. So we've been doing this all along. But what happens on the next round is when it gets fun. So let's mix up our 50. I'm going to try to use good habits and wipe my knife off in between, so I'm not contaminating the little dots on the end. Mine's not quite 50. I'm going to add a little black. One of these days, we'll all have to use hand sanitizer, and you'll have to borrow some of my Winsor Newton paint. For the similar cost, this stuff is so beautiful. This 1980 paint. Okay, I'm going to cut my 50 in half and put a glob of it in the 70 spot, and then add a chunk of black to make my 70. And I'm not going to cut my 50 down to make my 30 because I'm running out. So here I'll just make a 30 by doing a little bit of white, or a lot of white and a little black. Okay, there we go. How's everybody doing? Good? I'm just going to use my synthetic flat, I think, for the whole day. So I'm going to do my white and blacks first. If you want, a good habit to get into is as you finish a color, you can take a clean palette knife and then scoop that paint back out onto the palette. Like I just scraped my white back down into that pot like this, and I got quite a bit of paint out of that. So that's a good way that you can kind of save stuff. Can you see how much more the paint drags on the unprimed surface? Like you almost have to add a little more medium because it kind of gets stuck on that raw paper. Okay, so that's it. And as we know from when we did our first little ombre value scale on that very first painting, you could take this chunky 0, 30, 50, 70, 100 and fuzz it all together, right? Like this is where you go in with a clean brush, a dry brush, and cut those edges, and then you could get the 20s and the 40s and the 60s and the 80s in between, and you'd have a really pretty ombre. But I think out of the gate, it's that thing that says, always doing these big shifts, you win. Like you're not kind of build up. Can I move on to the next step? Yeah? So it says in the next one, with the pots of value that you have mixed up, add a tiny bit of any hue that you want to use into a future painting project. So just pick a color out of your kit that you like. And I will show you what I mean. Laying out all my paint so I can decide. Should I do a green or a red? I'm thinking alizarin. I'm going to do alizarin. Does that sound okay? So I've got my cool red. And I'm just going to put, as we talked about before, keeping your paint pots of color on the outside of the palette. And then I don't want to destroy my black and white scale. I want to keep it intact. So I'm going to cut little chunks of it over. Even if there's not a ton left, like enough to where, I didn't leave room for that one. If you needed to have that color to blend back with, it would be good. And then I'm just going to take a little bit, and maybe I'll do, let's say like a donut sprinkle into my white, and I can see how much, what they call the tinting strength of that color is. So if I start small, I can see how far it'll go. Let's see. So I'm going to take like that much. Focus. Just a little bit. So yeah, so my alizarin is pretty strong. Can I take this opportunity to talk about the transparent white? Is that okay? Okay, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to put that white on the other side of the palette over here. Sometimes it's called zinc. And I'm going to try to do the same recipe, the same amount of white with the same amount of red. And mix it up. Whoa. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that red tinting strength is really strong. But I tried my hardest to keep those the same palette, or the same recipe portions. And can you see how different they are? I mean, that is really a game changer, right? So like if you want to make something vibrant, like in that example we looked at earlier, with those brighter reds, you would use that transparent white and it's going to make them more vibrant. That's pretty cool. Okay, so then I'm going to keep working through my value scale with little bits of the red. And this is where you get to see, like, how much do I need? Can I add another donut sprinkle? That is, to me, is like a super pretty violet all of a sudden, right? Like that, look how great that looks. It's so good. So while this is like slightly a boring exercise, hopefully you're like really seeing the value of mixing up a full palette like this. Like if you do this, especially when we get into mixing with the complements, like you can make flesh tones all of a sudden. And you really only need those primaries as the base of everything conceptually, and then you add in all the other colors that you love. But look at that pretty color. Let's see if they're like that. That's like a super gorgeous violet. What that's telling us is that our ivory black is cool, right? Because it's turning kind of purple. And that alizarin is real cool. I'm going to use more alizarin when I get into my 70 and my 100. I'm probably using like 4 times as much as what I used in the paler ones. Just want it to bump up redder. You'll also notice on your palette when you scrape the paint away that really is more the color. Like you can't really trust what the color is in its little pot of pigment. Like it's harder to tell. And you don't really know until you paint it. Some painters they use a gray palette and they sell palette paper that's gray, or they'll buy a glass palette that's painted gray on the back, and it like makes it so you can see the true colors more. It costs a little more, I think. I don't know, I just like the button. Okay, so once you have your values mixed up, this will be the fun part where you can see how they mix, or how they compare. So now my black kind of looks like a rich chocolate or something with the red in it. Often when a painter uses straight out of the tube black, it can feel hollow or like it sinks into the paper like a velvet painting. So even if you're using black out of the tube, if you put some hue into it, it gets richer and fuller. I don't know that you can see it very well on the camera, but I can feel that temperature difference and how much richer that one is. It also says that the black is a heavy tinting strength because I used a lot of alizarin in that and it didn't really show. But you'll see it here for sure. Yeah, that's a pretty purple. So again, I'm going to scrape down that paint out of the brush onto the palette before I clean it off. There's so much paint in there. At this point, since I'm working lighter to darker, I am going to rinse out my brush. So I don't know, I'm going to come around and look at y'all if you can see it on the screen very well. It doesn't seem to be translating too great, but how it really becomes this pretty kind of rich value shift, whereas the black and white one up above just kind of feels a little less sophisticated maybe. Yeah, so like a little bit of the black here and I put a little bit. Yeah, put a little bit into that little oh, try to take a chunk of it and then make the next pot, and then the next pot. So always building values so that you can tell it. But Okay, this bottom one, you do another one with a green, and I'm going to do white, and gray. I'll show you. Just quite a lot of different. Weird that the text is so white in it. Maybe was it the transparent one? Maybe. I don't know. Okay, so this is where it gets really fun. The bottom row. Are you guys ready for that one? Can I do it? The bottom row, it says, oh, I need my glasses. Oh, my eyes are big. It says, add a tiny bit of the complement to the color up above. So these here, we're going to add like the littlest bit of green. And we're not wanting to make this turn green. We're trying to neutralize it to stay on that warm side, but to see how we can push it less, it just neutralizes it, grays it out. It says do this in super small increments until you get a hue you like. You can add more white if you want to make it lighter too. So I have a couple green options. I have my Phthalocene green and I have my chromium oxide green. I think I'm going to use the chromium oxide. Well, no, maybe I'll use the phthalo because that's the basic kit. I'll use the Phthalocene. And I'm just going to put a little bit in the corner. And I'm going to cut these again. I was just saying a minute ago, as I was walking around, trying to keep a palette like in this orientation where you have your value, one set of color, another set of color, another set of color, like keeping them all in these scales makes it so when you actually start painting, you're not, again, thinking about value, you're not thinking about mixing, it's just all there. And then you mix as you go, but you're mixing 24 things instead of 2 things, and that's how you don't make mud, basically. I'm going to cut these over. And then I'm going to do it on the white, again, so I can see my tinting strength, how aggressive this Phthalocene is. My guess is that this Phthalocene is strong because it's a man-made color. I think we had talked about before, if the paint sounds like fake sugar, like saccharin doesn't sound like sugar, so Phthalocene, diazinine, alizarin, like they don't sound, they sound chemical-ish. That means they're going to probably be transparent and very strong tinting strength. It sounds funny, but the higher quality paint, those $30 tube of Williamsburg or Old Holland paint, they have less tinting strength, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's not, because you can control it better. These can be really hyper and kind of overtake. So I'm going to take like 2 grains of salt, like a tiny bit in the white, and see how I do. Oh yeah, the tinting strength is pretty aggressive. But I'm going to actually walk this around the room. It totally worked. We didn't review the color theory histories yet. It's in the reading online and in the handout. But what we just did here is called the Munsell color theory system of creating a chromatic gray. So it's got chroma, but because I cut the green and the red across, I canceled it out enough. And Okay, I'm gonna finish out my Munsell chromatic grayscale. Yeah, Andrew, mine just turned, it's grayish, but it turned a little greener. I think, what kind of green are you using?
I'm using
The oxide?
yeah, oxide.
It just means it's got, the green has a heavy tinting strength. Yeah, mine just went super green. It also means that the mixture maybe didn't have a ton of the red in it. And if you wanted to cancel it out more, you would do a pinprick of the red each step of the way. It really is like cooking. Like you're thinking about these ratios, and then the hope is that you practice it enough and paint enough that you kind of get used to what they do, kinda. I feel like our black in the 1980 paint is got a really strong tinting strength though, because it's harder for me to cut it. Ooh, yeah, when I paint them, so excited. You'll notice too, like even when you're painting these little paint chips, like the painting of the paint chips takes a second because the mixing is when it took all the time. Correct.
So do I mix a violet or should I use the diacetyl?
If you have the diacetyl, you may do it just for speed, but you could do both and see how they vary. If you mix one, it's going to be even more sophisticated of a color. But you could see with the pre-made one. I think this diacetyl is such a pretty color, though. It's jewelry. So, okay, I'm going to move on to my next document, which is this one. I'll wait for you guys for a minute. What time is it? Thank you for playing along with me on this exercise. I think it will change everything. I get tedious, I feel like a comment will be overwhelmed. Mostly, of course, you think about your power all the time, how you're doing that. I'm going to go to the bathroom, I'll couple people finish up, and then we'll move on to the next document. And let's face it, paying those words kind of okay. That's just good. So for the next one, can I start talking about it? My glasses. Let me just. It says, now we're going to really try to intentionally mix these neutrals and the chromatic grays. What you're going to find, like when you do the formal analysis of some of the color paintings for the discussion, or when you watch the video, a lot of paintings that we love have a pretty neutralized base to parts of it, and then it's like out of the tube high chroma moments that sit on top, that they kind of float. I want to show you really quickly. Look at on this one, like if I grab, let's see, I'm going to take this bright pink that I made with the transparent. So this is solid alizarin and white, transparent white. But watch, like, what happens when they speak to each other, right? Like that is where it gets really pretty, as opposed to if I put it, actually that's really great too, but it's that the way that you're building those bright things on top that they become really fun. You could put some of the green. So this is a out of the tube Thylacine green and titanium white. It looks like toothpaste, but let's see it. That's like screaming bright because of that pretty neutralized underneath, which is pretty cool. Okay. So I'll do and talk through it, the blue-orange one, but what is a little confusing about the handout that I want to share is that it reads like this. If everybody could look at the TV for just a second. This is an exercise where blue and orange are opposite on the wheel. This is an exercise where violet and yellow, are opposite on the wheel, and then red and green is down the middle. So it's these three different tracks. Often I know you'll see, like on Pinterest or Instagram or in other painting classrooms, you'll see all these color grids. You're like, what are they doing? They're all different. It just depends on whatever the instruction for the recipe was, right? That's why you can't ever make sense of them without the instructions, right? Like they're often, the recipes are coming at it a different way. So the recipe here is that we're going to paint our straight blue and our straight orange. And this goes to what Melissa was asking earlier. Do I use the orange out of the tube or do I make one? We don't have an orange, do we? We don't even have an orange. So you have to make one, right? So what this exercise is for is it helps you kind of learn about your actual paint kit. So every time you switch paints, it's always fun to maybe make a little chart so you can see what their capability is. And like here on violet, you might do half of it with the diazonine and half of it where you make one. Do you know what I mean? Like it'd be cool to see how those vary and how the diazonine is going to be really jewel toned and the homemade one will look more sophisticated. Then it asks you in this one, I'm just going to talk about blue-orange again, to do blue plus 50 orange, so 50-50. And that should be straight up brown, right? Like that you're going to, and try to do it like cooking. Like see if you can eyeball the same amount and the same amount physically and see if you get a brown. If the blue, if it turns blue, it means your blue has a stronger tinting strength. And if it turns orange, it means your red has a stronger, or your orange has a stronger tinting strength. Then it asks you, cover this up again, to take that brown and mix it with some white to tint it. And you're going to love that color. Like you're going to say, ooh, that is flesh. That is, you know, something in nature. Like that's going to be really beautiful. Then you come down, so you're reading across the way we would read in the Western world here. Then it says, taking that mixture that you just made tint it again with more white. So I want you to get in that habit of like cutting your value down. Then once you have that pale one, put a bit more orange and a bit more blue. So hopefully when you start painting, you do this all intuitively, very fastly, very quickly, and that's how you move around your palette and make things happen. Then the bottom one says, taking that one up above, mix the tinted chromatic gray with another hue of your choice to make a new hue. So you're just adding it with something different to see what it does. So again, it's not so much about the product, it's about like what are my paints doing, how do they function, and so forth. So I can kind of talk through blue-orange and then just kind of leave you to finish out the other ones. Does that sound good? Okay, here we go. This is more fun than painting a color wheel. I think that's why if you want to do the color wheel, you can. But the color wheel stays so bright and so high chroma that we won't really ever paint with these colors necessarily. I mean, you totally can, but it's not as hard to figure out these. Okay, I'm going to start. Oh, and I put, never mind. I'm going to, on my blue, I think I'm going to start a new palette. I'm going to save this one to the side and make a painting with it in a minute. But I'm going to start a new one so you can see where we're at. So I'm going to start with my blue, and I'm going to put my ultramarine next to my Prussian. If it helps you to label your palette with a marker or a pencil that'll write on there, you may want to. You can see where you're at. Also, I'm going to do this before we get going. Put this over here. Again, when you start making paintings, real paintings, not exercises, you probably won't use all the paint. Like you're going to pick a palette to run with. But it's a good habit to, like if this is my blue, then I could lay my greens next to it. My violet could go here. So you're like laying it out around the palette according to the wheel. What's this one? Yeah, if I wanted to add in all my complicated ones, but I'm not. I'm going to take out the extras. You can be done with it, like if it's almost all gone, but I'm going to try and whip up a little painting with it at the end just to see what I can do with it. Did you have a lot left? Yeah, hopefully. Like I could scrape up I could use this green and my white. These are pretty thin, but I have white here. But I could do a quick painting with these when I'm done just to waste them. Or not waste them, I guess I should say. But yeah, I would probably, because we're doing these exercises, start a new palette so that you can kind of see where you're at. But you can see here that I've made the color wheel. I'm going to put this over here on the outside. But you've got blue, violet, red. This would be your oranges. Yellow, green. So you run it around the edges like the wheel. It talks about this in the color video, but we know the color wheel, hopefully, we've watched the video about it. This is our kindergarten rainbow, Roy G. Biv, fraction circle. Roy G. Oh, I talked about in the color video that while it is theory, it's also based in physics. Like this is how the cones and the rods light up in the back of our eyes, and that when we did that canceled out pretty gray, that Munsell gray, that's based in physics, like that they're literally neutralizing themselves. We are working with the subtractive color method because we're using pigment, which means that this can't ever get any brighter than what's in the tube. So anytime you affect it, it's going to get duller and duller. Additive color theory is when you're using light. And so when we can go back to the Perot Museum when the pandemic's over, you can go in there and they have these light sliders, and you can go from like mixing blue and yellow together and they make green, but as soon as you add the red in there, they go white. They totally disappear. And so that's the opposite way that the light works. But that's why I think the kindergarten Roy G. Biv works across the board. Like even if you're working additively or you're using CMYK, still K is black, C is cyan, which is blue, magenta, M, which is really red. Like you just kind of simplify it down to that Roy G. Biv. Okay, so I'm going to squirt out my paint all the way around. Again, just a little bit. I'm going to leave room for a homemade green here. I'll put my yellow. If you want to do this with all of your colors, you can, like if you got the extra ones, but I'm going to keep it to the basic kit. Oh, well, no, I do want to add them in. I want to see what my violet does. I added in that extra green. I guess I left out my yellows. Okay, so I'm going to clean my brush, start fresh. I might use a smaller synthetic flat so that I can cut my rectangle in half so I can see what they do. This would be an example of what happens with cheaper brushes, where these are flying away, so I could just cut those off. I probably can't get those to go back in. Okay, so I'm going to do I'm still using my solvent-free fluid gel. I'm going to do the Prussian and then the ultramarine. This also gives you the opportunity to see how transparent or opaque each color is, which doesn't seem like a big deal until it starts to bother you, right? Like until you start to try to make something happen and it's not functioning properly. And hopefully, even just out of the gate, by painting the Prussian next to the ultramarine, you see that one is going to make like a really cool pop-like image that's really fun and playful, and the Prussian is going to make it look more like the world, right? And so I think the goal is to learn how to make paint look like the world, but know that it's super fun to make it look poppy and surreal and fun and playful. Like in my own painting studio, I actually try to prefer to stay away from some of the really neutralized ones. Well, some of it. But just so you know how to have that control. Okay, so I don't have an orange. Nobody has an orange, do they? Wasn't one I added. So I'm going to mix up my cad red and my cad yellow. But I could do another one to see. I did 50-50. Do you remember I talked about it the other day? Do I want to do, this is about amount of paint and overdoing it. Do I want to do yellow into red or red into yellow to not make a bucket load of paint? Right, you do the darker into the lighter so that you're building slowly. But if I start with like a big hunk of red, I'm going to need this much yellow to make it orange. So always go dark into light. But this is 50-50 and it's super pretty. Just for fun, I'm going to make one with the yellow ochre, which I think was in the kit, and the alizarin. I just want to see what it'll do. Ooh, it's like a pretty burnt orange. I'm going to mix some of the cad yellow into it too, just to see. So this is where you're like testing recipes, right? You just kind of see how they work. So there, again, that's 3 families of color in one orange, but like that could become my skin at some point, right? That mixed with the blue to cut across it, like it can be cool. Okay, so I'm going to rinse out my brush and mix my orange and my blue together. I feel like I'm forcing you guys to do sit-ups today. I'm having to use a lot of the solvent-free fluid to get the paint to move on the paper. Whoa. That's pretty fun, like to see the really homemade orange with the more natural oranges or yellows and reds, and then the bright one. So now I'm going to mix the blue and the green together. Blue and green, not that. Orange and blue, sorry. Again, put the dark into the light and try to do a 50 at this point and see. Yeah, that's like the prettiest olive green ever. But here's where it gets fun. I'm going to grab that white from my other palette or squirt some out. I'm going to use the titanium. And I just mixed the exact color of the concrete floor. Really fun. So these are those chromatic grays that Munsell talks about. And then I'm going to add a little more white. And then I'm going to try and affect it by adding more of the blue or the orange. I think I'm going to do the Prussian. Oops. The Prussian was super strong, and that totally looks like nasty toothpaste. Oh no, it's kind of pretty. And then the bottom row says, mix the, sorry for the typo, the tinted chromatic grays up above with another hue to see what happens and how to fix it. So I want to make this a pretty green, so I'm going to add more, I'm going to add some green, see what happens. So again, it's not so much about what color you end up with, it's more about the knowledge of like, oh, that's what that color does, or that one is such a strong tint, or, and then the last one says, mix that tinted chromatic gray again and see if we can turn it into something else. I'm going to add yellow to it because it's green, and see if I can get a even prettier green. And that last complicated color I just made, hands down, is my favorite and the one I want to make my painting with. So everybody's is going to look a lot different, but again, it's not so much about the grid as it is about learning what the colors do. So at this point, is it okay if I just turn on the music and work with your sheet? like those grades could be the understructure or something. Because, but if you did indirect, you could do those grades with your dye layer instead of layer white. You know, have so much volume. That's all. Yeah. No, it's beautiful. Yeah, yeah. This is different. Like I'm not sure, but this is like take one of these with whatever your leg is, and then you add something. Yeah, add something to it. So like, I think I landed here and I thought, I'm not blue. Yeah, I did yellow, and then I did more yellow. There's kind of everything to see there too. So yellow cabinet and red cabinet. So we Can I turn some music on? You guys okay with that? Yeah. Tell me if you don't like this, we can change it. You might, on some of them, try using the transparent white versus the titanium and like do one square on top and one square on bottom and see how they compare. You'll notice that the transparent white doesn't cut quite as quickly. Like you would need more of it to go a lighter value.
You